Good afternoon, everyone. We'll ask that you go ahead and keep yourself on mute as you enter, but we are excited to have you with us today and to continue our series of home-based childcare, supporting home-based childcare educators whose primary language is other than English. And today we're going to be focusing on moving towards language justice. As always, we hold these sessions in a meeting format so that all of us can participate and learn from one another. So please, when we open it up for discussion and we have some activities planned today, come off mute or put your comments in the chat and we will share them. This session is being recorded, and the recording and all of the associated resources that we mentioned will be emailed to all who registered for this session or are available in a little while on the Build website in our home-based childcare page. My name is Danielle Fuentes Johnson, and I am from the Build Initiative. And as always, I am honored to be here beside my partner in this work, Jeanna Capito. And from Build, we have Jonathan Chapman helping us with all of our logistics. So thank you to all of you. On the next screen, we'll take a look at what we're going to talk about today. So today we're going to welcome everyone back, and then we're going to have a conversation around moving towards language justice. And we'll get our conversation started by hearing from Oscar Tang and Patricia Sullivan from Family Childcare Association of San Francisco. Then we're going to open it up and connect around some activities to get your input. And then in what's next, in our closing, we'll take a review of our takeaways from today's session, share our contact information, and we'll also ask you before you leave to complete a short survey that'll help us to better co-create these sessions for you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeanna Capito to review our core beliefs.
Welcome and good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are in the country. We are thrilled to be here together and to be really unpacking more around supporting dual language and bilingual professionals and the learners that they support. And like always, we want to touch base on our core beliefs. So take us to the next slide really quick so we can look at them together. As we've been doing this, and this is one of the reasons why we always touch base on them, is to sort of think about their relevance for the topic that we're working on and to think about the ideas of how we are working on or attending to the systems change that needs to occur to really move for stronger and more inclusive systems related to home-based and family childcare settings. We also realize that our core beliefs maybe need a bit of a refresh. So as we look at these here together, we would like to begin thinking in future webinars of getting more of your input on how we expand the core beliefs and sort of ensure that they are encompassing how much we have grown as a community and covering topics and really unpacking some of the most critical work that's in front of us. But as we always look at them together, we touch base on the concepts that are inherent to them. They're pretty broad based, and in one way that's good, but that also means that some concepts like language justice might not be as explicitly stated as they need to be. So that's some of how we're going to continue to think about how we evolve them, sort of 2.0 in the world of core beliefs. But the systems nature to them is really important to us. And that first one around family childcare, family friend and neighbor, whichever sort of title or category that you may fall in a state or community, is part of the fabric of a true mixed delivery system in the early care and education setting in your state or community. That's one of the critical and most core ones. We know that the strategies and supports for home-based childcare settings, number 2 there, should be resourced on par with center and school-based. And we also know that at times that can be a leap for folks to even know what that answer is. What is the dollar amount that it means to be resourced on par? Number 3 probably takes us a little bit more to this question of language justice. And are we really approaching this idea of how the work and strategies and the systems work is responsive to the needs of family childcare providers and the unique modality of care, their role as small business owners, and is really intentional in their development? I think that's probably where this particular topic aligns a little bit. But you start to see, as we look at the core beliefs together, that there's no one place that today's topic directly aligns. And it also may speak to that idea that the core beliefs don't attend to this topic as much as we'd like them to, as we think about how do we evolve and grow these core beliefs in the next few months together. But we also know how important it is that all of the other initiatives or ways that we can leverage more systemic support for family childcare and home-based care in our communities is leveraging the different federal initiatives, private funding opportunities, sort of all things that are out there. It also seems that we have some responsibility to be pushing some of these very core language justice concepts with those different initiatives, right? So that we ensure that we are driving with what we value and want to be leading versus being led by the initiatives and the funding streams. And that can always be a difficult balance at times. We often get caught up in that. So just something to be holding in our heads, where we see the core beliefs playing out today and how we can strengthen them when we really begin to unpack these concepts. I've already, as we move here to the next slide, moved a little bit in and out of terms, and you know that we always make sure that, especially when we have folks that are new to the webinar series, new to participating with us in this learning community, that we very intentionally use different terms, because across the states and communities that you all represent, there are structures that define or title family childcare, license exempt, family friend and neighbor care. And then there is also sort of just our working understanding in what you may refer to yourself as or refer to the programs that you work with as. And so we want to be inclusive of all of those different variances. We're not making a statement that there's only one type of home-based care or that there's only one type of family childcare. We are encompassing all of the different ways that it comes to play in communities. And we want to be clear on that as part of the language. So I think it's important that we sort of define that for us, how inclusive this work is and how inclusive this particular approach to doing systems work together. And in that, we also have begun being more intentional about really being flexible about whether it's provider, owner, educator, practitioner, operator, because we know that in many instances, we put our own sort of judgments on things. If we say, well, I want to move all family childcare owners, and I want to call them all educators, we've heard directly from family childcare owners that they're very proud of owning a business, and that's why they call themselves a family childcare owner. So it's not that it minimizes them. They feel it's a matter of pride that they own their own business. So we want to, in that same way, be inclusive of all the different ways that the leaders of those programs refer to themselves and think about themselves in our space too. So that's why you hear us move a lot of different terms and try to use them somewhat interchangeably so folks sort of hear themselves in the language that we use. So that's enough sort of grounding, I think, for us this afternoon. Let's move into where we're headed with our content today. We have engaged partners from the Family Child Care Association of San Francisco, as Danielle mentioned, to be a spark for us. Both Oscar Tang and Patricia Sullivan have been active in our learning community webinar series for probably almost all of the 2 years that we've been hosting these national webinars, and we know have sort of deep knowledge and experience of this work around language justice, particularly partnering with family childcare owners and providers in the San Francisco community. So we tapped that expertise and knowledge to offer us a spark today. And as Danielle said, after we hear a little bit from Oscar and Patricia, then we're going to come together as a group and foster more ideas and discussion as well. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Patricia and Oscar to get us started.
My name is Oscar, Oscar Tang. I'm from San Francisco. I'm on the local board of our local family childcare board of San Francisco. And then I think, a little bit background of our San Francisco community. We have around 800 family childcare provider in the whole San Francisco. Whole California, about 26,000. And then San Francisco is a little bit special because of the, we are city and county. A lot of resource is condensed together in 49 mile. And then we have 1/3 of Chinese provider in San Francisco, so around 260 provider. But in the California, according to the official number, it's not yet 5%. And then there's a law on when we do the advocate, we need 5% to have to have the state to take action on translating certain work. Yeah, so I don't have the specific law, but yeah, later on I can send it to Danielle, and Danielle can pass it if yeah, that's something people interested. I think one of the reasons why it is special for San Francisco, we can get our advocate work because of our population composition, because 1/3 of our provider is Chinese. So the city and county, the city early care of education, they cannot neglect the need of it. So as a result, we have those resources. But then a lot of resources limited to only in our area. So for the neighborhood neighborhood county, even just one county of San Francisco, they won't have the same access of the information or same access of resource. Sometimes, so when time after I've been involved with the advocacy work, I feel like it doesn't make sense if the states, they can do something that can help the whole state, so it doesn't need to rely on the local county. Why is it a thing that the state not doing it? So I starting asking this question. I have one example I can bring up and share. To see if it makes sense to you. One day I attend one of the webinar by the states. Just looking at it, and then there's a ASL interpreter is doing the ASL interpreting, is talking about some childcare update because of the transition and everything's going on in California right now. And then I look at the interpretation. There's no Chinese interpretation. And then I start asking myself, or asking, is it the ASL population, is it bigger than the Chinese population? That's my key question. And then when I think about, if you don't, why they do the ASL, because they it's the law require, and then it's the access. And for language, actually, if the monolingual community, if they haven't, they don't have the ability to listen or obtain the information that you offer, basically they are blind and deaf to the information, the good info they are sharing. And then it's really detrimental throughout the last COVID, those those updates, because all those information is so you really need to follow those health guidelines and all those things. A lot of time those translation, it comes a couple months later and then it's already expired. So that's something I can just start the conversation. I can let our director Pat talk about something.
Thanks, Oscar. You know, that was really interesting. We did look at why it was that sign language was more likely to be seen as for interpretation for these meetings. And I think one of the takeaways was that it is easier for English speakers to ignore the distraction of sign language than it is for them to have the patience to wait for speakers to have their presentations translated. Even just the giving of the translation itself, the speakers have to slow down. the audience needs to wait. And they also have to be willing to listen to presentations that may not be in English, or that may have speakers like Oscar that speak with an accent. We are, I think, too intolerant sometimes of allowing for that kind of diversity. And it's especially important in California, where 70 or more % of the population speaks a language other than English at home. We can't pretend that doesn't happen. We can't ignore the fact that there are so many, not only citizens, but folks that work in family child care specifically, that speak a language other than English at home. And I think that's really important. I think one of the things we wanted to talk about also is the way the guidelines and policies are rolled out, as Oscar was describing, about especially important stuff like COVID, but not just that, about all kinds of policies and guidelines that affect family child care. It always comes out in English only. And then it takes forever for us to have any of that information translated. And that means that there is no cultural, there is no diversity, there's no cultural congruency, there's no support for those that speak out a language other than English to be part of the same conversations we have about whether or not these policies are actually valid or good or work in every community. We can't honor that kind of cultural diversity without linguistic diversity as well. Oscar?
Yeah, we will have some questions prepared by Danielle. Why is a network or association important for provider whose primary language is other than English? This question, I think to myself, and then I'm thinking, because for the network and association, a lot of time it is not run by the agency, and then it's more provider oriented, and then providers see it's a more safe space, and then so they are more open to share their concern, and then what's happening to them, what they can do to so that they are more willing to share within their own. For the language capacity is one thing, but then I think at the end of the day is the currently provider don't feel the support system, or myself, I don't feel the support system is treat us or treat me as an equal partner. They see us as you need, if you are participating on this, you need to follow this and that. I think is that's how I see it. So so agency is more compliance oriented, and then for network association is more provider oriented. I think that would be the key term.
Yeah, I also think that it's easy for government agencies and funders to ignore one voice. It's so easy. But when FCC educators get together, especially those for whom English isn't their first language, and join a larger group, it's much more difficult, not only to ignore what they're saying, but to include their voices in future planning. So that's, I think, a key reason why speakers, those folks who speak English or for whom English is not their home language, it's even more important for them to become involved in networks so that their voices can be amplified. Oscar?
We see a comment saying that resources are limited in terms of accessibility because of the history, how we can develop system for knowledge be accessible. This is something I think everybody need to come together, do their part. for me, yeah, our association, we do our part. I mean, as a board member, or yeah, as a community, I join many of the Facebook group. If I see any question that I can participate and share, I will talk about that in the group. Yeah, after work. I mean, association is not, it's a volunteer. So basically, it's all volunteer hours. You put in, yeah, the time that to because we are in the same field together. Coming as an immigrant, I don't know. Yeah, I see my mother or yeah struggle with the language. I feel like yeah, there's provider without the capacity of the yeah going to the Facebook, they may not be able to communicate like yeah, share knowledge using those yeah, even Facebook. They use the WeChat, but WeChat, the functionality is not as open. You cannot search the group and then join the group. You cannot connect people unless you know someone that can connect you. So yeah, there's yeah, different language provider. I think they have their different challenge. So yeah, just because working too long, and then for our one of the reason why I become more involved is because yeah, working with their colleagues, yeah, Pat, Elena, Esperanza, all different our local leaders, yeah, seeing them yeah, giving their heart, giving their all to the provider, helping the community without asking yeah, anything in return. It makes me think, and then our former director who passed away, Rosie, yeah, thinking of yeah all their work, why they are doing all this. It makes me, yeah, if I have the capacity, can do something, I'm willing to yeah do my extra part just to make, yeah, hopefully it can help the system, yes, switch a little bit, and then yeah, it will take time, but yeah, we are here. Whether you offer the support or not, we will offer the support to the community. But if you guys, I mean, if the state or if the system do it, it's great. If not, we will find a way to make it through. Yeah, it's yeah, family childcare is a lot of people's livelihood. Yeah, the whole financial support is based on the business. So we, yeah, as the community, if we can do our part, we will do our parts.
Yeah, and I think, well, one of the questions we were asked was, why was it important for agencies to hire family child care folks with family child care experience to work in their agencies? And family child care is complicated. It's complicated on many levels. There's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of compliance issues, just a lot of complications. Add to that language and the need to make sure that everyone understands, and it gets super complicated. And I think that what we found is that when we talk as educators, we use a lot of jargon, a lot of shortened definitions we assume everybody knows, and it gets really, really hard sometimes in even amongst those of us who are all speaking the same language to understand what everyone's talking about, and then just add on some new policies or some new guidelines, and then that's just a crazy mess. So we need to make sure that at the agency level, that when something comes up, or when FCC calls, or when there is an interaction, that we are making that communication as simple and as clean as possible. Oscar?
For me, I don't, if you hire someone with the family childcare experience, I think it's not necessary, but it's more relatable. You know, their hours is long, you know, they are they do everything. They do cleaning, they do teaching, they do, yeah, not like a center. You can, yeah, the division of labor. Somebody can, as a floater, somebody can, yeah, help to do the observation. Yeah, they can take turns. Yeah, for small family childcare, basically they need to do it all. Sometimes maybe with their family members support, but if not, they are all on their own. So I think if you have the experience when the provider hear from you, it may be more relatable. But I don't think it's necessary. Yeah, if you really listening to the provider you talk to, you know what they are facing already. So I don't think it's necessary. But with those background experience or, yeah, context, I think it will help the provider yeah, feel heard.
Sounds good. What did you think of the 3 or 5 things you would recommend for?
Top 3, 5 suggestion. I think. Oh, there's some suggestion I can make. That's a very easy, and then everybody can do it. Yeah, for the system wise, it can be done. It's doable, and then it's whether you are doing it or not doing it after you hear. So be aware, if you want to listen, you have the solution that I come up with. So the solution I come up with, right now we are using Zoom. Zoom, there's function you can do interpretation. So you can hire interpreter at a low. For us, we find some yeah, affordable yeah, B Corp. Yeah, we have our translator. So you can hire them. And then make sure when you request for interpretation, ask them for recording in their own language. And then so in the Spanish, Chinese, yeah, all their interpreter, they can record locally. So they have the local, even they don't have the transcript, they have the recording, at least the recording part. So they have the audio or video. It doesn't matter. Yeah, you have the audio. Later on, if you want to do the editing, you can do the editing. If you don't want to do it, it's okay. Yeah, provider won't. Yeah, many provider maybe just listening to it. They may not look at it. They are busy enough. Yeah, they just have the information available. It's good for them. And then yeah, that's the solution. But I have been proposing this to the state. They are not doing it. They are saying the reasoning. They say, oh, the information is changing frequently, and then I think, oh, news change every day. Nobody is watch the old news, and so make sure put the days. Yeah, it will fix the problem. So. There's solution if you are willing to do something. I think that's the legal thing or whatever. At the end, they don't want to be liable of anything they share. That's not not true. So they come back. I think it can keep the accountability more too, and the transparency part more too. So yeah, that's one thing. As a provider, I would like to see this happening. Yeah, for the whole system. If you want to make the language support to be accessible for everyone, so people who miss the live webinar, live information, they can listen it yeah, later on.
Yeah, that's so important. And I also think that one of the things that would be almost required is that all those important documents be translated. We've had a difficult time sometimes getting some of those basic guidelines required by the state translated into enough languages to be able to really support those of us that are working in classrooms. I also think that sometimes the meetings should not be always conducted with the focus on English as the primary language. What if you had meetings where you know your population is 50 or 60% Spanish speaking? Why wouldn't Spanish be the primary language of that meeting, and then have the English interpretation on the side? Why do all meetings have to start with English as the foundational language? I think it isn't culturally respectful or responsive sometimes of the communities we serve. I was going to ask Oscar, what do you think about having those meetings where the languages where we meet by language? So there's a meeting for Chinese speakers, a meeting for Spanish speakers. What do you think of that idea?
I think yes. This is very common in our local practice, that we separate because of the to make the meeting more efficient, more effective. So we kind of separate provider by language, and then so different provider will go to their own language group and then listen to the information, and the presenter present it in the language they chosen. I think there's good and bad. The good thing is people maybe just ask questions that they want to, or listen to the language they need to. But then the bad thing is sometimes different community face different experience or different problem that we don't want. We will miss the opportunity as the system to see whether it's a common problem across the language. If they don't have a way to share back, then they can just neglect that, or it may be an individual issue, individual problem. We see it very common. Oh, it may be just an individual. We can talk to you after the meeting. So they don't need to. They just deal with the individual provider instead of fixing the system. So that's my quick answer.
Yeah, and one of the things that we discovered was sometimes languages, if we silo language, we're also siloing racial and ethnicity as well. So we have groups that only meet, that are all Spanish speakers, that are all Latino, or all Chinese, and because of that, we found ourselves not really, that became a barrier to diversity itself. And we really didn't want to have a segregated community based on the difference in languages. I think that, what do you think, Oscar, about I have talked to a couple of providers, and they talked about how when we go to agencies and we see folks on staff that they've taken, they're native English speakers, and they've taken a lot of Rosetta Stone or something. So they know a lot of different languages. They were hired specifically because they were, they had a lot of language. What's the difference between someone who's hired who knows how to speak Spanish versus somebody who's like, then maybe hired for whom that language is native? What's the difference in how they relate to the community, you think?
That I don't have an expert answer, because I'm not on that. But then that there's some maybe I do it this way. So for me, I help doing the interpretation sometime for the community. It's really difficult sometimes as a Chinese speaker translating some English term that we don't have it in Chinese, or I need to do the research on it. Maybe I need to create some terms that make it understandable in that short phrase, like the I don't know, just like the equity, this term, you can talk about it in Chinese term, but then does it make sense to the audience? Do they have the background on those? I think they need to listen more enough. They need to exposed to those terms long enough, and then maybe there's a follow-up meeting, talk about discussing all these different things happening in the ECE policy world, then they can help them to help them to understand what the policymakers are talking about, and then why they are pushing on the QRIS now, and how QRIS become the first place. Oh, why you say QRIS is not the thing now, and then why somebody saying it's a racism, and then what does that mean, and then so I think all this it need to be if you ask me to if you ask someone even a professional interpreter without preparing, and then you just put them in the interpretation room, I feel sometimes even the professional interpreter cannot relay the terms in terms of the community, what they listen. I don't have a concrete example here, but I hope it can get my point through.
From the chat, Oscar, it sounds like you are singing the right song for the whole audience. They understand exactly what you're talking about.
I think I do write down one point about the education. Education is a big barrier for education requirement is a big barrier for language. If you talk about language access, in San Francisco, we have pathway that try to help provider to get associate degree, but then there's some class is they always stop by the language. They need to get the GE to have move on to the next one. So that's not resolved for the provider. Pat is the teacher in the City College. She can break it down, but I know you have your agenda too. So if Pat is still here, she can talk a bit more.
Okay, this is the last thing, I guess, where I do teach at City College at San Francisco State, and it is really fascinating sometimes who shows up in those classes. I had one class one semester where there was a good 15 people in that class that didn't speak, that for whom English wasn't their home language, and we still managed to find a way to hold that class by having small groups, more talking, more communication between me and those students that for whom English wasn't their home language. But it happens in every class I teach, and I think in the end, it requires just a willingness to engage, to make sure that everyone knows what they need to know, but also patience by the students and the faculty of the college to understand that all of this stuff takes time. I mean, it is as complicated as it sounds to be in a classroom where you don't. Can you imagine being in a room where the teacher is speaking a language you don't really totally understand? And how are we expecting these folks to go through and get degrees or to become more qualified to do the work that they're doing if we don't find ways to make sure those classes are bilingual?
Thank you both so very much for getting this conversation started. I think we could have a whole other session and just invite you and Oscar back. What you were saying resonated in the chat so much with the audience and reflecting their experiences as well. We have an idea boards ready to capture our thoughts, but we can also just kind of talk this out. In listening to Patricia and Oscar talk about what they're doing in San Francisco and your own experience, what are some of the components of an authentic, successful multilingual experience for home-based childcare educators? What's been helpful? What would have been helpful? Let's go ahead and pull the slide and just come back together. Feel free to come off mute. We'll put it in the, Jeanna just put the idea boards in the chat. We'll pull that up in a minute if you're someone who likes to see it. Otherwise, just come on up and share your thoughts.
I can share some of what we're doing in Colorado is about a year and a half ago when we started with FFN, family-based childcare in 4 different refugee immigrant population communities, non-Spanish speaking. That was a mouthful. But basically we work in the Arabic speaking, the Afghan, so Dari and Pashto, Myanmar, Karen, Chin, and Burmese, and then Central African, which typically our communities are Swahili, Kinyarwanda, and French. So we had these 4 larger groups, and we went in there saying, we don't know anything. What do we need to know? What is important to you? So I think really using that participatory action research approach so that we're really listening to their ideas, not only identifying their own problems, but how to solve them as well. And so we started with about 15 people, and we started partnering with another group who said they were very steeped in cultural responsiveness. And we lost 8 of our people during that because they had worked with one culture and then thought that they could bring that to other cultures. And now we're up to 24 this year. And we did home visiting as well as the home-based childcare. But again, as everybody was saying, it is based on relationship. We could not move forward until we developed trusting relationships, not just between me and the other people, participants, but between the participants, learning to trust, learning to share their stories, learning to be seen and visible, and having that safe, right? Most of the refugees and immigrants who are coming are not safe being seen. They have worked to be silent and invisible so they can stay safe. So just moving and shifting that. And somebody else said, taking time. That's revolutionary, to just slow down and take the time to make those relationships work. And so I've been really grateful that so far, that's what we're doing.
Thanks, Deb. We have some great comments in the chat as well. Naomi shared that having a point of contact of someone who can connect in their language and support them in understanding the systems and helping them through it. Fernanda shared that when she was a FCC provider, she created a survey for families asking questions about culture, celebration, foods, anything they wanted to share that was important to them and their family and wanted her to know. And then she would do her best to get the documents translated into the other languages as needed, just so they knew someone cared. I mean, really, it goes back to that relationship again. Let's see, and that's true. Sometimes families don't have time. So how do you balance forming a relationship and showing you care in another language when there isn't time? If you have any of those suggestions, that's a great question. Put those in the chat as well if anybody has strategies. And how do you cultivate trust? So I'll throw that back out to Patricia, Oscar, Deborah. How do you cultivate trust when you are seen as an agency or an organ, some sort of authority? How does that occur?
Well, I could say one thing I think is really important is if you don't have your documents translated to all the languages of the folks, or as many as you can, then there is no trust that you understand or respect them and their culture. If they're not welcome, then trust isn't possible. So the first step is to welcome, to make sure that those that we reach out as much and as often as possible, to make sure that that everyone's voice can be heard and that everyone's culture and language is respected.
I have a follow-up question for that. When it comes to really the thing that impacts so many of our programs, all of our programs in terms of funding, how do you budget to have time and caseloads that allow for this kind of interaction and engagement?
I feel like that's where we have to break down the status quo, because when we're like, how do we do that? Well, we have to push back and say, hello, if you really want some systemic and real change, funders have to recognize that there's a way to do things. And we have research to back all of this. It's not like it's, a brilliant, new, innovative thing. It's, we just have to push back and say, this is what it's going to take, and be that accomplice. We have to break down the status quo. It's the status quo hasn't worked. Why would we keep repeating it, right? Somebody said, doing the same thing over and over is a definition of crazy. So how do we break down as a unit? Because when you're doing it by yourself, it also can get scary and isolating. So how do we do it as a unified entity and say, we have this money, we need it to be spent like that? And just one thing. I mean, there's so many complexities in it. So
any other thoughts, any other questions? We do have a few ideas on the idea boards in terms of what's been helpful: building trusting relationship, active listening of those impacted, co-creation of knowledge and solutions, employing from different cultures and languages that are in your community. So clearly that is also that critical piece. It's reflecting what's in your community, not just diversity for diversity's sake.
One of the things that we've seen a little in the chat is the concept of language justice resonating and wanting to see it more used, more frequency. And that was actually one of the things that we really wanted to also, as a group, be cultivating more shared understanding around and putting giving more legs to the concept of language justice. Obviously, it's not as if we're the first people to define the concept. I'm not suggesting that, but we are a group of people coming together around early care and education and family child care, which is a different vantage point of who we work with. So we actually would like to share, and I'm going to put the link to it in the chat. Hopefully, I have my fingers crossed that it works. To the, thanks Danielle, to the Mentimeter. We wanted to have us all begin reflecting together of what comes to mind. How do you think about or define, and what do you, when you hear language justice, how does that strike you? We'd like to begin pulling that together and use the Mentimeter tool, but then continue to grow that out as we work on this as a group together. So that's not something you have to stop and do right now. You have the link, you can follow it whenever you have a chance, and take a moment to fill that in. And I see a hand. Suzette, please jump in.
Hi, I'm happy to be here having this conversation with you all today. I'm coming from Duwamish land, Coast Salish land here in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, Washington. And I'm an employee with the City of Seattle's Department of Education and Early Learning. In our early learning department, we have made a commitment to putting funding and doing some leveraging of city funds to support language justice across the city, specifically looking at the languages that are spoken in the city and the county, and leaning in on our community partners in the county and their language justice plan. So there's a two-tiered language justice plan where tier 1 languages are automatically funded for interpretation and translation, and tier 2 are funded as needed for interpretation and translation. And so one of the things that we always do when we have community meetings is we ask folks if they need interpretation. We ask folks if they need materials translated ahead of time. And we're also looking at language justice, not just it is quote unquote foreign languages for heritage speakers, but also looking at language justice from the frame of ableism. And so making sure that we also have American Sign Language translators available and materials available for those who need it with ASL. And when we're doing our community meetings, either in Zoom or even if we do our one-to-one meetings, we're always constantly, we have a language line. We're making sure that we're hiring folks from community. And one of the other things that I think has been really successful for us is creating a family child care roundtable where we bring community partners together along and invite our family child care partners to sit at the table so that they have an opportunity to speak directly to systems organizers and that providing interpretation at those meetings, as well as looking at supporting a family childcare roundtable where we have folks from the community and we actually host meetings in their home language. And sometimes what we would do, because the critical mass was mass of providers at that meeting was Somali speakers, we actually had interpretation for the English speakers, so that the whole entire meeting could be conducted in the heritage language, which was Somali.
Thank you, Suzette. Thank you for sharing those strategies. We could continue this conversation, and we plan to continue this conversation. The recording will be made available, but we are closing in on our last couple of minutes, and we want to thank Patricia and Oscar and Suzette and Deborah and all of you, Fernanda in the chat, Heidi, and everyone else who has commented in the chat. We will collect the ideas that came out of this conversation and include them in the resources as we send out the recording and the PowerPoint, as well as the word cloud that you all are generating as you think about it. So take a minute as you think about this session. Anything else you would add to that Menti, and we'll send that out as well. But right now, I wanted to let you know that we are looking forward to next month. The Build virtual conference is going to be held. So that will be July 11th through the 13th. And we have a number of offerings this year for on home-based childcare, on provider voice, as well as emerging bilingual and supporting individuals whose home language is other than English, whether that's educators, children, and families. So we hope that you can attend. If you have any questions about that, please let us know. And as we close out, there's going to be a survey that pops up to capture your ideas on this session and other ideas that other places you'd like us to take this series. So we thank you. We look forward to seeing you in August for the next national webinar, and when we'll be talking about messaging and marketing into specific language communities, and just the importance of family childcare and home-based childcare in general. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great afternoon.